You're watching the award-winning GHS-TV, a nationally recognized student television station.
Hello and welcome to this week's edition of GHS-TV's award-winning talk show, Crosstalk. I'm your host, Reyna Katko. We're in Madison County, Tennessee, named after founding father and President James Madison. Founded in 1821, Madison County has a rich agricultural and industrial history, which we will be exploring today. We'll visit the Bemis Mill Village Museum and later make our way to the home of the heroic Casey Jones. But first, I had the chance to sit down with Billy King, a local historian. Mr. King, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for letting me.
We are currently in the Denmark Presbyterian Church. Can you tell us a little bit about it?
Yes. This church, this particular building was built in 1854, but it is the third building of the congregation. And they bought this property that it's on in 1833 and actually built this building in 54.
Before any settlers, the Chickasaw Indian tribe hunted and traveled through this region. What drew them to the land?
They lived here. We have 4 mounds in here behind the church, and they're being excavated right now. They're carbon dating at 1000 AD, and we know that there was a complete village there now, probably with a population of about 500 is what we think.
When did the settlers come into the picture?
The treaty was signed with the Chickasaw Indians by Andrew Jackson in 1818, and the land was put up then in grants. If you'd been in the Revolutionary War or the War of 1812, you could get a land grant free. Otherwise, you did buy the land grant. And so our first settlers came in about the 1820s. We know that there were enough squatters really already here that the Denmark Post Office was already established in 1820, making it the oldest post office continuing operating in West Tennessee.
Did the settlers look for the same things that the Native Americans looked for, or did they see another purpose for the land?
Well, of course, the Native Americans did not, quote, farm like the settlers actually did, although the Native Americans were here because of the rich land and because of the game that was here. And matter of fact, the Denmark got its name because of that. When the surveyors came in 1818, they found a man living on this site, and his name was John Rose. And he told the surveyors that the Chickasaws called this Denmark, 2 separate words, because there were animal dens in the area, and it was their hunting ground.
President Andrew Jackson played a big role in the founding of Madison County and Jackson. Can you tell us a bit about its founding?
Well, of course, Denmark was already here. Denmark is older than the city of Jackson or Memphis, either one for that matter. And he and James K. Pope, the president, also had relatives at Denmark and already here, and matter of fact, members of this church actually. And he really recruited troops from this area to go with him to the Battle of New Orleans. So a lot of them came back. Even some of the Chickasaws went with him also. He was friends of the chief of the Chickasaws that was here. They didn't like the Creek Indians who were in New Orleans.
As you mentioned, the area played a small part in the Civil War. Can you talk about some of the battles that were fought here?
We thought that. As a matter of fact, my second book is entitled A Community at War, because we didn't know that. We have really the only battle of Madison County is Britton Lane, which is about 4 miles in behind the church. And so everybody just assumed that was it. But we didn't realize that it was occupied primarily by the 17th, 20th, and the 30th Illinois. And they camped, their campground was Estanale. Desanali is a Chickasaw word, and it means here we cross. It's their crossing of the Hatchie River. As a matter of fact, when they would come into Denmark, they camped right there on that land. And the University of Illinois, along with the 30th Illinois reenactment, is helping us research that and sending us letters of soldiers who wrote while they were here and said, we are behind the Denmark church in the mulberry trees. And they were here the night before the Battle of Britton Lane. This is where they were.
Can you talk about the role that Denmark Presbyterian Church had in these battles?
The church was stormed many times. Fielding Hurst was the northern general that would come into this area, and he would always come here, of course, because of the size of the congregation. And when we were redoing the building, we found a good number of slugs in the walls, so we know that there was some fighting in the church itself. And as I told you earlier, on the first pew, he came one Sunday morning and there were 2 horses tied up outside, Confederate horses, and he knew they were in the building. And so he stormed the building, but he couldn't find them. They were sitting on this front pew with their girlfriends, and they got up under the skirts of their girlfriends because they had those big hoop skirts on.
The county was once largely agricultural. How did trains and railroads change that?
Our part of the county is agricultural. Matter of fact, the cotton that's raised in this county, in this section of the county, sells on the New Orleans market 4 or 5 cents a pound more than cotton raised anywhere. And it's because of the rich land that is actually here. Matter of fact, most of our farms are still connected to the original land grants. I live on one of those.
What makes up Madison County's economy today?
Farming is still a major deal. Bemis and Mercer are the only 2 places there are cotton gins left in the county. And in the old days, of course, I grew up on a farm, go to the gin would be an all-day affair. But the gin in Mercer, for example, can bale a bale of cotton every 3 minutes actually now. And so cotton is still the major crop of this part of Madison County, and it's still the major part of the economy of Madison County.
And finally, one last question. What, in your opinion, makes Madison County a great place to live?
That's a good question. Well, you know, for me, it would be family ties. It's simply because my family's been here since 1818, literally. And so everywhere I look, it has something to do with part of my family, actually. It is a very peaceful area. All of Madison County really is. And quite well run. You know, we're not broke. And so it's just a good place to be.
Mr. King, thank you so much for sharing the history of Madison County with us.
You're welcome.
We're going to take a short break. When we come back, we'll explore life in one of Madison County's most famous mill towns. Stay with us.
We're running a 24-hour broadcast television station like no other school has done.
It is student run, it's student produced, it is student written, and it's student directed.
Here's to another 35 more years.
Students here get immersed in lots of different types of shows so that when they go out into the real world or to college, if this is what they want to pursue, they are so prepared.
Those lessons have also affected me in the ways that I would never even imagine.
It has shown me to be different and to, not settle for mediocrity. When you're producing a show, you want your show to be the best one it can be. You want it to be, a show to remember, a show that you want to look back on and say, I did that.
Yes, I did do this. Did I believe that I could do this? No, but because of all the support that I gained, I know that I can actually get this done.
I know that the skills I've learned here is something I'm never going to forget, and same with the experiences here.
From all of us here at GHS-TV, have a great day.
For more information about the Kappa program, visit ghskappa.com or call 755-7775. You're watching the award-winning GHS-TV, a nationally recognized student television station.
Welcome back to this special edition of Crosstalk. In the 19th century, mill towns made their way south as the country became more reliant on cotton. Since 1992, the Bemis Mill Village Museum has been dedicated to preserving the town's history. I got some insight from Joel Jackson, chairman of the Bemis Historical Society. Mr. Jackson, welcome to the show and thank you for allowing us to be here.
We're glad to have you. It's an honor.
Can you explain the concept of a mill town and what made Madison County a good fit for the Bemis Brothers Bag Company?
Well, the concept is that you want to keep your workers close to the mill. In 1900, everyone didn't have transportation, and it was common for workers, like in a mill situation, to be late for work. Well, you can't have that in an operation like that, so they developed mill towns where the people were close by their jobs. And also, they let them live in a house at about 50% of what the normal rate would be. So that created a sense of having to stay because things were cheap. And so the concept of a mill town was finally, it ended up sounding kind of like a family because everyone stayed in the same house for a long time, worked in the same mill, went to the same church, and so it was really close-knit community, and it caused people to want to stay and work. And as a result, some people worked, one lady worked 55 years, so that shows how people thought about the situation.
What made Madison County a good fit for the Bemis Brothers?
Oh, well, it had about 3 or 4 things that were necessary. In 1900, we had steam power. That was before TVA came along, and so steam power was very important. And it had to have a free-running stream 365 days a year. And our Cane Creek, which is runs through the middle of Bemis, it fit the bill. Plenty of water for the steam that run the mill, and also had plenty of workers. As you know, a farmer doesn't always make money, and when they do, it usually goes to pay the bills that they just created. So they had a good labor force, ready and willing, and then about 100 feet from the entrance to the mill was a railroad called the Illinois Central Railroad. That's what it later became. At that point, it was the Mississippi Central. And so it had an outlet. When they made the cloth, they could ship it directly to anywhere in the world by just moving it just a few yards. And they put a siding in, which we still have in the front yard here, a siding that where they could run the trains right inside the mill, load up the box cars and ship it anywhere in the world.
From what I've read, life in a mill town ranged from dreadful to enviable. Where did Bemis fall?
Bemis was voted as the model mill town. And as a result, as a sideline, they even had a flour company here in Jackson, and they made a flour called Model Mill. But Bemis itself, the town, was a model mill town. It had, where a lot of mill towns had gravel streets and ditches. They had asphalt and gutters, curbs, sidewalks. Very few mill towns had sidewalks. It was a real neat town.
What was life like for a typical mill family?
You got up in the morning, you went to work, and you didn't do anything except just, most guys went to the YMCA, or a lot of them did. And they had checkers, dominoes, pool. All this was free. They had everything from gas to a suit of clothes. And people from Jackson, which was 3 miles away, they would come to Bemis to buy name brand suits and shoes and things because the prices were about 30% less than they were in Jackson. So that was another amenity. Another one was a swimming pool. It cost like 5 cents until you graduated from high school. And this theater right here was a nickel. You could come to the show in here for a nickel. And this was first it was built as a movie theater, and then about like 2 years later, they decided that the people in Bemis needed a little more class. So Mr. Bemis recommended that they get Broadway plays to come in, or off-Broadway, from New York City anyway. And they would come in, they'd bring their backdrops and their main actors, and they would perform on this stage right here. And then we had free water, had free garbage pickup, free sewer, and free light bulbs. They really took care of people.
The Mill Museum has been designated as an official project of Save America's Treasures. What does that mean?
Well, I guess you would say it's already ended because it started in 2000. But what it was a plan to designate some of the things that needed to be saved that were not getting attention, some of the smaller things. And so we did apply for that designation, filled out all the paperwork, and we won, so to speak, and we got a grant. And actually in cash value, it was over $200,000 we got because we were a Save America's Treasure.
Mr. Jackson, that is all the time we have today, but thank you so much for sharing the history of Bemis with us.
Thanks for coming by.
Coming up, it's a thing of legend, how a Jackson Railroad engineer became an icon, as we continue to explore Madison County.
This place, it's extremely unique.
You are pushed to do things that you didn't know you could do because someone else saw it in you.
If you're with us for your whole 4 years here at GHS, you get a great foundation of amazing classes.
Try the priest.
The approach we take to whether it's the fall play or the spring musical is that the students are truly the ones that are making the magic happen.
Tell all the people. You put the work in off and on stage. Not only are you on stage acting and playing a part, you're working, you're pricking your fingers, sewing the costumes, you're learning how to make exotic makeup designs, you're learning how to build the set that you're going to be planted on.
And as you grow with us within the program, your skills continue to develop and we build off your previous knowledge. And hopefully by the time you graduate, you're a well-rounded professional in a way, and you can move into any area that you'd like after high school and succeed.
For more information about the Kappa program, visit GHS-Kappa.com or call 755-7775. You're watching the award-winning GHS-TV, a nationally recognized student television station.
Welcome back to Crosstalk. I'm Reyna Katko. In 1900, a railroad engineer from Jackson, Tennessee made a split-second decision that would make him a legend. His name was Casey Jones. We wanted to know more about this railroad icon, so I met up with Clark Shaw, director of the Casey Jones Home and Railroad Museum. Mr. Shaw, thank you for taking the time to talk with us today. This is quite the museum you have here.
Thank you so much, Reyna. We're so glad to have you and all the team here from Germantown High, and we are excited to have you with us today and tell you all about Casey Jones.
The legendary Casey Jones. Who was he and what happened that made him famous?
Well, Casey Jones was a man born, honestly, we don't know exactly where he was born. We think southeastern Missouri, in the boot hills of Missouri, maybe in western Kentucky. But what we do know is that Casey Jones was part of a family that moved to Casey, Kentucky when he was a boy. And it's there he fell in love with trains because there was a station there that he would go down to, and he said, I want to be a railroad man. I want to be an engineer someday. And so at 15, he left home and he joined the railroad. And he became a telegrapher, and then he became a brakeman, and then he became a fireman, and eventually at age 26, he became an engineer on the Illinois Central Railroad. But he had moved here to Jackson, where he heard there were more opportunities to move up in the railroad. And so that's how he wound up here in Jackson. And he raised his family here. He married here at St. Mary's Catholic Church. He raised a family of 3 here. He's buried here today, and so Jackson is his home.
How did he become famous? What happened?
Well, the story goes that in 1900, of course, for about 7 years, Casey Jones ran freight service between Jackson, Tennessee and Water Valley, Mississippi. But there was more money to be made if you were an engineer of a passenger train, and so an opening came up in Memphis in early 1900. And so he was in the process of moving his family to Memphis, and he had this run that he would make every other day between Memphis, Tennessee and Canton, Mississippi. It was a 188-mile run. And it was on a leg between Chicago and New Orleans, on a run that still runs today on Amtrak. And so he arrives in Memphis, and he's supposed to lay over for a day and rest, but he learned that night that the engineer was sick, and he volunteered to take his place and take the train back down to Canton that night. And so they started out of Memphis that night an hour and a half late. They started making up the time. There are stretches of track in Mississippi that are long, straight stretches, and in those stretches, it is estimated by Sim Webb, the fireman who survived the accident, that they reached 100 miles an hour that night. They were making up the lost time. They were only 14 miles from their destination, only a couple of minutes behind schedule. But Sim Webb, who was the fireman, he was shoveling coal and putting it in the engine. And he looked out the fireman's side of the train, and he saw the red lights of a caboose way in the distance. And he said, "Oh my Lord, there's something on the main line ahead." And Casey immediately jumped up. He grabbed the brakes, he reversed the throttle, applied the brakes. The emergency brakes immediately began sounding the whistle to warn people up ahead. And then he ordered his fireman, Sim Webb, to jump. He said, "Jump, Sim, jump." And Sim jumped out off the train, and his life was saved. He broke his arm, but his life was saved. And but Casey stayed at his post, and his train ran into the back of another freight train. They were trying to get off the main line, but an air hose burst. It locked the brakes. It left the last 3.5 cars out on the main line. He rounds this curve, and there's the train. And so it's too late to stop. But he plows through a caboose and 2.5 other cars of hay and corn. Engine flips over, and Casey is killed. But his was the only life lost. And he was engineering a 6-car passenger train. And so that night, his heroic actions saved the lives of a lot of people.
There's a song called The Ballad of Casey Jones. How did that become one of the most famous songs in America?
When that accident happened in 1900, Casey is one of over 2,000 people to die in a railroad-related accident in the nation. He was another statistic, and he would have been another statistic in that had it not been for an African-American named Wallace Saunders. Wallace Saunders was an engine wiper in Canton, Mississippi, who knew Casey Jones, who liked Casey Jones. And as an engine wiper, to pass the time, he would make up tunes that he would sing as he wiped the engines clean all day long. And after Casey's death, he started singing one about his lost friend, Casey Jones. And it became quite a hit around the roundhouse. And a man who worked in the roundhouse who had 2 brothers in vaudeville, which was an early American form of entertainment that traveled the country. And these men put that song in their act on the vaudeville circuit, and it traveled and became a hit, Rage on the vaudeville circuit. But what made it go international in fame was 2 songwriters out of Los Angeles took the song, they changed up the words some, they put it in sheet music, and from there it went literally around the nation and literally around the world. And as one of the most famous railroad songs ever, and it still is today.
In the 1930s, a book, motion picture, and a radio play added to the legacy. What drew people to Casey's story?
And those early railroad engineers, like I said, they were the astronauts of their day, because most people didn't travel within a few miles of where they were born and raised. And here these trains were traveling hundreds of miles, and they could be like an explorer somewhere else. And so there was a fascination with that. It was just a great story. This was a man who was an ordinary man, caught up in an extraordinary moment of time. And in that moment, he proved himself a hero.
From what I've read about Casey, he kind of embodied the spirit of America at the turn of the century.
He did embody think about it, the railroads built America. The transatlantic railroad that crossed the whole nation over to the Pacific, and the 2 that came together in Utah way back in 1869, I think. And because of the railroads, America was able to go from the east to the west much faster, and it grew this country. And so, there's a great debt to pay for all the people that worked so hard to grow the railroads. I cannot imagine the toil and sweat and the deaths that were involved in putting railroads all across the country. So there's this wonderful fascination with trains. There's a wonderful debt of gratitude to trains, and the railroads. And so Casey is an embodiment of that. In 1950, the U.S. Postal Service did a stamp. And it was a stamp honoring the railroad engineers of America, and they chose Casey Jones to be that embodiment of the railroad engineers of America because of what he meant to the American public at that time, and still does today.
Well, we're in the Casey Jones Village, and it is not your typical museum. Tell our viewers about everything you have in the area. It's quite a lot.
Well, from Germantown in the Memphis area, we're only just about an hour's drive from here. We're at exit 80. Right off the interstate, literally about 60 seconds off the interstate, you're in Casey Jones Village. And we think when you come here, you're stepping back in time. We wanted to name the village Casey Jones Village after Jackson's most famous native son, Casey Jones. And so that's how the village became known as Casey Jones Village. But the village the village name is an umbrella name. And while you're here, you will find our old country store that was founded by my dad 53 years ago. And then right across the square, you will find this wonderful old Casey Jones Museum, his original home that he lived at the time of his death. We've got his wonderful 8,000 square foot train station. You've got an engine you can climb on and ring the bell. We've got a historic 1948 car in the middle of the village. Then there's some shops here, and then you've also got a 117-year-old chapel that people can go in. We have an 1837 antebellum home that we saved from being destroyed. And we've got a farm called the Farm at Casey Jones Village. And then we even have the historic country store that my dad worked in as a boy that inspired the country store we have here today. So we had a great restaurant, gift shop, ice cream parlor, and this wonderful museum for people to see.
Mr. Shaw, thank you for sharing Casey's story with us. He was truly an intriguing figure.
We are so glad to have you here, Reyna, and all your team, and with Germantown High. And thanks for being here, and come back to see us again.
Again, I want to thank all of my guests for sharing the history of Madison County. Organizations like the Bemis Historical Society and the Casey Jones Museum are helping to preserve the area's history for years to come. I'm Reyna Katko. From all of us here at GHS-TV, thank you for watching Crosstalk.